Utah's Great Salt Lake is the largest saltwater lake in the Western Hemisphere, a famous tourist destination and home to a wide variety of exciting wildlife. Yet, from the turn of the century to 1950, a massive wooden 12-mile railroad trestle ran through its center. This was the Lucin Cutoff, one of the early 20th century's most significant megastructures. It brought unprecedented economic impact to the West, not to mention a sense of wonder to those who experienced riding a train across the Great Salt Lake. Although the original structure is now demolished, approximately 20 freighters pass nearby on a new causeway daily. And according to some, submerged in that salty water are the eerie remnants of a century-old structure that's since been abandoned. And many people wonder just what happened to all that timber from the old trestle bridge. Stay tuned to find out, as today we discover the story of the Lucin Cutoff, America's forgotten megastructure. I'm your host Ryan Socash, and you're watching It's History. Although the Great Salt Lake's origins can be traced back nearly 17,000 years, it didn't appear on the maps of European explorers until around 1575, and when it did, the landscape would change. From the 1600s, the area around the Great Salt Lake was remote and largely uncharted. Before European exploration, it was inhabited by indigenous people who lived a nomadic lifestyle, relying on the region's diverse ecosystem for hunting, fishing, and gathering. In the 18th century, European explorers and fur traders began to venture into the area. Spanish explorers were among the first Europeans to encounter the Great Basin, but their expeditions were limited due to the challenging elements. The 19th century saw increased exploration by trappers and traders from as far away as the Hudson Bay Company, as well as other fur trading enterprises. The Great Salt Lake itself was largely seen as a mysterious, foreboding body of water. Its high salinity, unique ecology, and harsh surrounding environment made it a difficult and uninviting place for extended settlement. However, it captured the imagination of explorers and cartographers, contributing to the broader understanding of the American West. The mid-19th century brought significant change with the arrival of the Mormon pioneers, famously led by Brigham Young. In fact, in 1847, the Mormons established Salt Lake City near the lake's eastern shore. This settlement marked the beginning of permanent habitation and development in the area. The Mormons undertook extensive irrigation projects to make the arid land productive, laying the groundwork for agriculture and community building. As the century progressed, the discovery of valuable minerals in the surrounding mountains, such as gold and silver, attracted miners and prospectors, further increasing the population and economic activity. By the time that the Transcontinental Railroad linked the east and the west coast, in 1869, the Great Salt Lake area had become a critical waypoint and hub for westward expansion, commerce, and transportation. To reflect this, the number of train movements increased significantly, but there was a problem. Between the massive lake and the hazardous terrain, locomotives took a long time to pass through the region. In fact, the original route built by the Central Pacific and Union Pacific Railroads curved around the northern edge of the Great Salt Lake, climbed over 1,500 feet of steep grades, and passed horrific switchbacks. According to the Salt Lake Tribune, the passage had so many curves in the creek that it could, quote, turn a train around 11 times. Hence, the Lucin Cutoff was conceived as a solution to these problems. By driving directly across the lake, the route could be shortened by miles. Work on the Lucin Cutoff commenced in February of 1902. The project involved building a 102-mile rail line from Ogden to Lucin, Utah, which included constructing a 12-mile-long wooden trestle bridge across the lake's western expanse. Newspapers like the San Francisco Call and the Post hailed the project, proclaiming, quote, the Lucin Cutoff is 102 miles in length, 72 miles on land, and 30 miles on a combination of trestle work and fill-ins over the waters of the Great Lake. It will affect $500,000 in yearly savings. However, the construction faced significant challenges, including the unstable, salty mudflats and harsh environmental conditions of the Great Salt Lake. To address these challenges, engineers used innovative techniques such as drilling pilings deep into the lake bed to support the bridge, as well as creosote-treated wood to withstand corrosive saltwater. A large labor force comprised of thousands, including many Chinese laborers, were mobilized for the project. They worked under arduous conditions, and some of them would lose their lives as they often faced extreme weather and rugged terrain. Materials and supplies were transported to the construction site by rail, and temporary construction camps were established along the route to support the workforce. Construction was completed in November of 1903, and the first trains ran on the new route shortly thereafter. The Lucin Cutoff officially opened on Thanksgiving Day to what journalists proclaimed was a marvelous event. Prominent railroad men from across the country ate turkey together in honor of the successful completion of what was considered at the time the greatest railroad engineering feat of the century. Officials arrived on a special train consisting of 9 private cars of the Harriman lines. On board was also Miss Adela Wagner of Ventura, the first woman to cross the new cutoff. As a result of these efforts, the cutoff immediately reduced the Southern Pacific Railroad's travel time and operational costs, becoming a vital component of the transcontinental rail network, facilitating more efficient movement of goods and passengers between the East and the West Coast. When the line opened, it included short causeways extending from the western shore of the lake and the edge of Promontory Point, connecting with a nearby 12-mile-long trestle bridge. The cutoff also included a causeway that spanned Bear River Bay from the lake's eastern shore to Promontory Point. This section included a 600-foot trestle, allowing Bear River water to flow into the lake. The line included a railway station called Mid-Lake in the middle of the Great Salt Lake. By 1908, 5 passenger and 7 freight trains used the cutoff in each direction daily. And by 1909, the media showcased the project as, quote, a good example of the American method of doing things on a large scale. In 1910, a massive storm ravaged the structure, halting trains and requiring enormous repairs. A decade later, the cutoff was already a critical piece of American infrastructure and prioritized as such in its maintenance efforts. By all measures, the Lucin Cutoff was a very successful accomplishment. The Trestle Bridge operated uneventfully for nearly half a century. Well, uneventfully that is until 1944, when one of the worst train disasters in the state of Utah would unfold. On New Year's Eve, December the 31st, 1944, 2 Southern Pacific trains traveled along the Lucin Cutoff. The first train, known as the Pacific Limited, was en route from Ogden, Utah to Oakland, California. It carried many military personnel returning home after World War II, as well as civilians traveling for the holidays. Due to mechanical issues and delays, the Pacific Limited stopped on the main tracks near Bagley to check for hotboxes, which are overheated wheel bearings. The second train, the Pacific Limited number 21, followed the same route and ran on the same track. The engineer of the second train, unaware of the stalled train ahead, continued at full speed. The Pacific Limited suspected that this could be the case, and so they tried to alert the approaching train using flares and other emergency measures, but due to poor visibility, the signals went unnoticed. Then, at approximately 5:14 a.m., the second train collided with the rear of the stalled Pacific Limited at a high speed. The impact was catastrophic, causing the rear cars of the first train to telescope into each other and catch fire. The wooden coaches were particularly vulnerable, leading to an intense blaze that engulfed several cars, trapping passengers inside. Rescue efforts were immediate, but hindered by the remote location and intensity of the fire. Residents, military personnel from nearby installations, and railroad workers rushed to the scene to help. Yet despite their efforts, by the time the fire was extinguished, 48 people had lost their lives. and 79 others were injured, many of them severely. The investigation into the Bagley train wreck revealed that several factors contributed to the disaster, including poor visibility, inadequate signaling, and the crew of the second train's failure to heed emergency warnings. The accident led to significant changes in railway safety regulations, particularly concerning signal systems and communication protocols between trains on the same track. News of the horror spread across the country. Passengers showed hesitation to travel across the lake, and the railroads, they used this moment of crisis to justify a significant change. The truth was that the bridgeway itself was beginning to fall apart. You see, over time, the once celebrated wooden structure faced numerous challenges. The harsh environmental conditions of the Great Salt Lake, including the corrosive effects of the salt water and the shifting lake bed, damaged the structural integrity. Regular maintenance and repair efforts were required to keep the bridge operational, but these became increasingly costly and time-consuming. What's more, engineering and material science advancements rendered the wooden trestle obsolete. So not long after the disastrous train wreck, the Southern Pacific Railroad decided to replace the deteriorating structure with a more durable rock and earthen causeway. The trestle was functionally replaced in the late 1950s with a parallel dirt and rock causeway built under the contract of Morrison Knudsen of Boise, Idaho. The Ogden Standard Examiner estimated that laying the rock fill alone cost over $35 million. The investment was further symbolically justified in 1956 when a fire on the wooden trestle ignited a passing train, burning down a part of the structure as the high winds whipped it along. Then, in 1957, the structure was further destroyed when a barge plowed straight through it. Even so, the original trestle remained in limited use alongside the causeway until roughly 1975, and was even added to the National Register of Historic Landmarks. The new causeway had major environmental drawbacks, as it prevented lake water from flowing freely as the open trestle once did. Another issue occurred in the early 1980s when Utah experienced heavy flooding, and much of the extra water along the Wasatch Front flowed into the Great Salt Lake, resulting in historically high water levels and the flooding of nearby landlords. In response, the state of Utah constructed a 300-foot-long bridge at the western end of the causeway to aid the two trenches in the channeling of water to the northern arm. From there, the state breached the causeway under the new bridge on August 1st, 1984, allowing pent-up water from the southern arm to flow into the nearby northern arm. Moreover, the causeway was continually sinking and had occasionally required more and more material to rise its height above the lake's level. During the flooding of the 1980s, this buildup included placing 1,430 surplus railcars along the northern edge of the causeway and filling them in with rock to act as a so-called boxcar seawall. All the while, the wooden trestle was decaying beside the new causeway. From the handrails to the decks, strong winds broke the structure apart piece by piece until it became impassable altogether. At this point, the railroad sold salvage rights to the Trestle and Cannon Structures Incorporated, who in turn began dismantling the structure in the early 1990s. The process took over 7 years to complete, and the lumber was repurposed to provide manufacturers over 30 million board feet of wood. The stockpile took decades to effectively market and sell, but it has garnered a unique fan base and has been found in products ranging from flooring to furniture and decking. In March of 2011, the Union Pacific Railroad requested permission to close the two 1950-era culverts because of age damage and the causeways sinking into the lake bed. The two trenches were closed in 2012 and 2013, respectively. To mitigate the effects, the railroad was required to build a bridge and breach the causeway under that bridge so the water could flow. Construction of a 180-foot-long bridge was completed in the fall of 2016, although the railroad did agree to delay the opening of the branch for a few months due to environmental and water level concerns. And as the years passed, those concerns only grew. During the so-called American megadrought, The amount of fresh water flowing into the lake's southern arm had dropped significantly enough that during the summer of 2022, a 4-foot-high berm was constructed in the breach beneath the 2016 bridge. This berm slows the flow of the saltier water from the lake's northern arm into the southern, as the increased salinity was beginning to affect the ecology of the southern part of the lake. And this isn't exactly intuitive. Even though the lake's elevation in the southern part remained slightly higher than the northern, the saltier water in the northern arm pushed along the bottom of the breach into the southern arm, and this is where the contamination happened. Otherwise, it's business as usual on the Great Salt Lake. With over 20 trains passing it daily, what was once unthinkable has now become an ordinary fixture of the local heritage. And that's the story of the Lucin Cutoff. I really hope that you guys enjoyed the episode, and if you've got your own story idea that you'd like us to cover, feel free to shoot me an email, include a quick overview as well as any helpful images. Otherwise, you can also help our mission by clicking both subscribe and join. Until next time, this is Ryan Sokash signing off.